Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm joined by my podcast partner, Bob Duff, and this is the HockeyDebates.com podcast. We come to you twice a week to talk all things hockey, even though right now there's no hockey going, but we seem to find topics, and we're very happy to be joined by special guest agent Steve Bartlett, who I've known since he became an agent. I have been writing hockey for exactly the length of time he's been an agent, and I've talked to him many times. He's always one of the great, colorful quotes in the business, and I always appreciate his insight. So, Steve, thanks for joining us.
Right along, Steve.
Oh.
It seems to have frozen on us.
Oh.
Steve has frozen on him. Oh, now he's disconnected.
Okay, well, hopefully he's going to sign back in.
Is that me? That's
nope, there you are. You're back. Okay. Yeah, I just gave you a great intro. So the world knows about you and knows what a great, colorful quote you are. So there's no pressure for you to come on and say something glib. Steve, right off the bat, I want to talk to you about. I mean, obviously, nobody knows what's going to happen here. Let's stipulate that right now. But there's been a lot of speculation that most of the sports leagues are going to try to come back and play without fans. And in hockey, we're hearing neutral sites. Now, we've also read that Donald Fear and Gary Bettman haven't even worked that out yet. So nothing's been decided. But I did want to talk about it with you as a guy that knows players as well as anyone. You've been representing them for years. I read a story over the weekend about two baseball players, Clayton Kershaw and Mike Trout. Now, those are big-time players. And both of them expressed reservations about, living in a biosphere, in the safe zone for 4 months. Now, if we do it in hockey, it'll be half that. But do you think players are going to go back and be totally excited about playing and just forget about the fact that they're going to, be missing their families and they're going to have to not see them for, especially if you go a long way in the playoffs for 2 months?
No, I think that's a real valid concern, and I think it's going to be probably split. I think, obviously, if you're a young single guy, it's a lot less of a concern than if you're leaving a family at home with kids. And a lot will depend, I think, on a number of things. One, kind of what the status of the world is, where they live. And remember, because I have grandchildren and we don't have the ease of babysitters. We don't have, daycare or school. So there's a lot put back on the spouse to whom you're abandoning to go live in the biosphere, as you mentioned it. So, I mean, there's a lot of concern, I think, especially for the married players. One, that they leave their family behind in any kind of concern about safety. And secondly, just the burden that it puts on the spouse. And I don't want to rain on the parade. We all want our sports back, but at the end of the day, as we found, there are things bigger in life than sports. So we have to be awful careful and considerate of those issues, I think.
The one thing I've been wondering about too, that really I haven't seen much or any discussion about it, being I'm in Canada here, I know our border's closed right now except for what's deemed essential travel.
Yep.
And if the border doesn't reopen, are they going to? I mean, I assume some players have gone home to Canada, and certainly some have gone back to Europe. Are players going to be able to get back, and are teams from Canada going to be able to enter the U.S. to play games? And those are questions I think are going to have to be answered as well.
Yeah, I think the questions far outweigh the answers right now, as we're finding with most of our daily lives. But it's, like I said, I think we're a long way. We all have that hope in our hearts that we can find a way to restart sports, but and it's going to be painful whether we start or not, in terms of what it's going to take to get back to the NHL as we know it and the economics of the game. At the same time, first and foremost in everybody's mind is, are we safe? Is it right? And clearly, when anybody talked about any chance of restarting, I was always saying very clearly, there's no hope in hell that you're going to have arenas full of people. It's going to be a TV empty arena event in any time in the foreseeable future. I think our best scenario is to start next season, or what would normally be next season, more closely to what we think is normal, and even that's in question.
Steve, let me ask you this. I have one concern. Like no one would be more excited to get hockey back than me, and I think all of us would welcome all sports. I'm excited about golf. I mean, I've been so desperate. I've been telling our viewers that I've been watching reruns of PBA bowling. That's how bad it's been for me. I've really missed sports. But my concern is this. I think the biggest question, if we're going to play, is what happens if someone tests positive? Because, you can say, okay, well, we're just going to quarantine them for 14 days, but, that's going to have a dramatic effect on competition. And, we now have learned, and this has really sort of been a recent development, that even if, you're not showing signs of the disease, you can transmit it. Even if you're symptomatic, you can still pass it along. So what does that mean if we test it, and how often are we going to have to test everyone? Do you have similar concerns about how that's all going to work?
Oh, 100%. And I think, every night you turn on the news and there's discussion about what kind of testing, who gets tested, is it antibody testing? Is it, all these variations, which are well above my pay grade, but certainly it's far from set science, and the path is very unclear. And it's not just the players. I mean, there's going to be hotel workers. There's going to be, off-ice officials. I mean, you can carry this on to, the 10th degree to figure out all the variables of people bringing in food for the players. And it's a challenge. And like I said, we all hope that we can get to a comfort level where maybe some of these questions we all have today are no longer there, but we've got a long way to go.
I think I can top you, Kevin, on the bowling reruns. In the last week, I've written 3 stories on Russian table tennis, and I did one on the weekend on marble racing. So I'm starting to get scared about how much I know about Russian table tennis. I actually Googled it to see if I could find any news on it, and the first 3 stories came up on Google search were my 3 stories. So,
well, the only person I've ever heard of that's written that.
Russian table tennis.
Well, sure.
One thing I've noticed, Steve, during all this is that the business of hockey is sort of still going on. I see Mikhail Grigorenko signed a contract to come back to the NHL today, and I saw the Blues re-signed one of their prospects. Is that kind of almost bizarre to still be dealing with the business of hockey while there is no hockey?
Well, a little bit. It's kind of been a saving grace for us to keep engaged with something that other than worrying about touching something. So I think, it's kind of been a welcome distraction. And I don't think any of us have doubt that at some point we'll get the world back that we know. It's more when. Certainly once a vaccine is developed, a lot of these doubts will go away. But in the meantime, I think teams like agents and players alike would like to think ahead a little bit to the world as we hope it will be again soon, and continue to go about their business. So it's a little bizarre. At the same time, again, it shows a little bit of optimism that we'll get through this, and if not sooner, later we'll be back to where we all can enjoy hockey the way we have traditionally done. I worry more about how long and how deep the economic impact will be, more so than whether we'll be back.
Well, that leads right into my next question. And you alluded to it earlier about the fact that even if we said we were going to have allow crowds, I don't know how willing people are going to be to slide into a church pew next to someone, or a movie theater, or certainly a hockey game where there's 18 or 20,000 people. I think there's going to be some reluctance, particularly if you're our age, or maybe all those people who were on beaches in Florida will show up, but the rest of us are going to be a little reticent to do that. So my question to you is, do you have any speculation on the impact, the economic impact this will have on the league and the salary cap, and even more specifically, there's a lot of guys who are going to be free agents this summer. What happens to them? Or is there going to be a reluctance to give them what they normally would be worth? You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you broke up a little bit there on me, but just my overall view. I mean, obviously, from a player agent standpoint, the concern is how deep and how severe the escrow is going to be in terms of hockey.
Oh, we lost him.
Shoot.
Hopefully he comes back.
Yeah. That.
You know, Kevin, I've been watching shows like Bill Maher on HBO, and these talk shows that are all going with this type of format now, and they're having the same technological problems. So I don't feel as bad now.
No.
Back now.
Yeah.
I want to get him back. So this is just, I think, the way the world's going right now, and I think the other problem is everybody's on the internet right now. Everybody that normally would be not at home right now is at home playing video games or watching Netflix. There he is.
Is it my connection?
Oh, no. We were just talking about the fact that we don't feel bad about this because NBC and ESPN and CNN has the same problems we have. Occasionally, you just lose your person. So anyway, you were saying about the economics and what your fears were.
I worry a lot about, how deep the cut's going to be in terms of hockey-related revenues. I mean, you have so many elements that you have to think about. One is, even if they allow fans in the building, which is the first big step, there's going to be a lot of economic impact on everyday fan in terms of having lost a job for a long period of time. Can I afford an NHL ticket? Can I afford my season tickets, until everything gets back to closer to normal? If I'm a corporate entity that's gone through a tough period of time and, what's going to be at the top of my list? Is it going to be a luxury suite at the game? Is it going to be entertaining clients at the game, or am I going to have to, pay more attention to my basic economic core of my business? So I know, again, it's a little worrisome. It's a little scary. I think it'll come back eventually, but it may not be overnight.
I think I've said this before to Kevin. I think the toughest job in sports next season might be the season ticket holder salesperson, because it's going to be an awful tough sell to get people to come to one game, as Kevin says, let alone to commit to coming to all the games. So I think you're right. There's absolutely going to be tremendous economic hits, and hockey certainly is going to get it even worse, I think, because ticket revenue is still a huge part of their overall package. I mean, the NFL can get away with just TV revenue, but there's not too many sports that can do that. So we've talked to a lot of hockey people about this question, but obviously with no Memorial Cup, no junior hockey playoffs, no Frozen Four, that's not going to impact an Alexis Lafreniere. Certainly, he's still going to be the guy that probably goes first overall in the draft, but a guy that might have been, maybe on the bubble of being drafted or not, or, a guy who was a fourth round pick who could bump himself up with a good playoff. That's got to be, not a concern, but certainly a disappointment for a lot of those kids. I'm sure you've got clients in that scenario, and are they worried about that?
I think they are. Like I said, we all like to look to the future and stay positive. I think if you're asking me kind of how I could see the economics of the game change a little bit, is I think there may be even more pressure to get young entry-level players in, because if a cap comes down and you have to field 23 players, and I have more concern for, I think, the veteran player who has been a solid third and fourth liner or a fifth, sixth, seventh defenseman. Now all of a sudden the teams go, we can't slot you in it anywhere near what you were making. We need to have an entry-level guy who can go up and down. If we have to have 5 of those guys and one of them works out, or he falters, we bring up the next guy. I think there's going to be some pressure to get some less expensive guys in the fold and play some guys maybe sooner than they should be, frankly.
That makes some sense. Well, Steve, our time has run out with you, but we do appreciate you coming on and giving us your insight and associated with all the experience you have in this league. And hopefully we can have you on again when we're playing hockey. That will be much better for us.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks for coming on. That's been Steve Bartlett, a longtime NHL agent who represents, he and his 2 sons have one of the stronger agencies in the game. They represent a lot of players. I've lost track of how many, but they're certainly a formidable group. And Steve, what I've always liked about Steve is he certainly represents his players. He stands up for them, but he's also very level-headed. He's thinking about the game in addition to making sure that his clients get proper representation. But As he sort of explained that, the concern over the economics, Bob, as once we move beyond, the fear of our safety, because eventually we will, this will be resolved. That the residue is going to be a difficult, challenging economic impact.
Yeah, I mean, nobody knows what that's going to bring. I mean, like you say, are people going to be willing to go back to games and buy tickets? And I mean, there'll probably be an element of people who are excited about it, but at the same time, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to think twice. I saw a story today about the movie industry and a theory that maybe the way to save the movie industry going forward is going to be the return of the drive-in. So you can all stay in your car and you don't have to mix with the strangers and that. And you don't have to worry if the people behind you are on their cell phone or not. So maybe we're going to see some sort of Back to the Future kind of thing going here in different industries as they find ways to convince people to come back to living the life they used to live. Well,
as a guy who considers himself as a nostalgic person, I would welcome the return of drive-ins. I think that would be great, especially the double feature. The double feature when we were kids was, I'm really dating myself, but you could go to the movies for $50, when I was growing up, and oftentimes it was a double feature, and you could get yourself some popcorn and a Coke, and you could all inclusive for under $1 or about $1 anyway. So I'm sure the prices won't be the same, but it would be fun to have drive-ins back. Bob, let's move a little bit off of the return of hockey and sort of just talk about some of the other issues. I wanted to ask you about. There's been considerable discussion about Dustin Byfuglien since that all came down, that they'd reached an agreement and he was going to walk away from money. And it's kind of interesting, for so many years, and I bet you have too, for years, you've kind of had in your head, or when you're on doing analysis, and you say something like, unless you're Barry Sanders, nobody walks away from leaves money on the table. And you know what? Yep, apparently somebody does, other than Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson, and I guess maybe Jimmy Brown too. But Dustin Byfuglien left money on the table, and I just assumed he really was done. But you keep hearing rumbling, like maybe he's not done, like maybe he's gonna try to come back with a different team. Your take on that? Do you think he's done and he really is going to retire, or do you think he'll slide back into the NHL?
Well, I've wondered from the start, is this a Winnipeg issue? Because, that's what you used to hear about Winnipeg and its first run in the NHL, is players just didn't want to go there. It was probably, we used to do these anonymous polls of players where they'd ask them all these different questions. Our chain would do it. And one of the big questions was always, which city would you want to play in the least? And when Winnipeg was in the league, it would win every year. Never even close. It was always Winnipeg, Winnipeg, Winnipeg. Nobody wanted to go there. I mean, I've been there. I can understand. But I could probably live in Winnipeg if they were paying me $1 million, and I wouldn't complain about it. But apparently, we don't know, because Dustin really hasn't talked about why he wanted out, why he wanted to get away from the Jets. It could be something completely different. But the fact that it is Winnipeg, some people are going to say, well, it's Winnipeg.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I've seen some social media discussion about that, maybe Dustin Byfuglien is a malcontent, that, that he has never been comfortable in, a dressing room environment. But I can tell you that that's really not true. My reporting through the years, and also told to me by Dale Talon, who knew him well from Chicago, is that Byfuglien is always among the more popular players in the room. That even though he has a almost non-existent relationship with the media, that he doesn't enjoy, having a relationship with reporters who cover the team, that with his fellow players, he gets along great. I question a little bit about, if he's going to complain about Winnipeg, I mean, he's in Minnesota. The climate is relatively similar. I'm sure the people in the great state of Minnesota would say their state's, better than the province of of Manitoba. I mean, I'm guessing. I don't really know. But if you're just going by climate, and he's a big fisherman, and so I'm not sure. I mean, like you said, he hasn't told us, so we don't quite know what the issue is. And maybe he is sincere, and he really does want to quit. To be honest, when this all came down, having talked to him a few times through the years, like, I wasn't shocked that he said, I haven't had enough. I just want to settle into my life. I like, getting out on the lake and fishing and kind of doing my thing. And I've had enough of hockey. Like that to me fit within the character of the person I knew. But, I would say this, if he is coming back, and I'm guessing he won't, but if he was, I would say that the Panthers with Dale Talon there, who knew him pretty well when he was in Chicago, I would think they would be interested in him as well. Like, he's an intimidating player when he plays in more ways than one. He's got that amazing shot, and he's a big guy. And, the combination, and he's, he can play forward as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
Well, along those lines, I mean, we saw this when the salary cap first came in. They brought in the buyout clause where you were allowed to buy your way out of some contracts to help your cap situation. If this does cause a significant hit to the cap, is there any possibility that they would incorporate some kind of similar clause to allow teams to escape big contracts? Like you mentioned the Panthers right away. I think of Bobrovsky, who certainly hasn't lived up to the amount they paid him this year, and they're on the hook with him for a number of years. He'd be a guy that might be a candidate to get pushed off the cliff if there was that kind of clause.
Well, depending on the what registers on the Richter scale in terms of the economic upheaval, I think we're going to have some sort of compromise agreement reached between the Players Association and the league, because I think it'll have to be. I mean, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that there were reports that if they don't come back, that the loss would be over $1 billion in revenue. Even if they do come back, if they come back without fans, then I think there's some sponsorships and so forth that they'll gain on that. But they're going to get half, maybe half of that billion or more than $1 billion back. So, but if there's 700 million short on revenue, well, that's going to have an impact on the salary cap. And it's hard for me to believe that that we'll fill up arenas like we normally do. The one thing you can say about the NHL is the fans show up. Now, we do have some problem areas. We know that Florida doesn't draw as well, and Arizona could be better, and I'm sure Carolina can be better as well. But you look around the league, and most of the teams are playing close to capacity. So, like next year, if all of a sudden people my age are reluctant to go to games because they're afraid of the virus, because there's no vaccine yet, and we have the economic issue, as we keep talking about. People have had to use their life savings to just to survive, so they don't have excess money for buying season tickets or even packages of 10 games and so forth. So I think we're going to guess that gate revenue is going to be down, and also corporate sponsorship, I would guess, would be down. So when you put all that together, they could be looking at a 2-year period when revenues are going to be significantly down after a pretty steady rise. Since Gary Bettman took over as commissioner, we've had a steady rise of growth in terms of revenue in the NHL, and that's going to stop. So, they're going to have, something's going to have to give. And I think it's in everyone's best interest. I mean, let's not forget that they're sharing those losses, they being the players and owners, equally. So there'll be some sort of meeting of the minds, and they'll have to figure out what to do. I don't think they can lower the salary cap, because everybody's been planning at this rate for the future. So, maybe you're right. Maybe there'll be you'll get a buyout that you're allowed to make, or everyone will just there'll be an artificial salary cap that allows everyone to sneak all their players in, that's not supported by the revenue, which would create a giant, escrow. So I'm not sure that's the kind of deal that you would want to make, but something's going to give.
Yeah, and I wonder, the CFL. I don't think they do it anymore, but at one time they're a salary cap league as well. They would allow one kind of like superstar contract that didn't count against the cap. That's how a guy like Doug Flutie ended up in the CFL, and a guy that Abnegilao and Rocket Ishmael was another example. So we're talking a while back, but still, I mean, that could be, maybe for 2 years you get to exclude one contract from your cap, and it doesn't count against the cap. Maybe that's a way to get around it.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, oh, well, I think they'll be creative. And, the one thing that, and this is to me such a positive, I know like the fan base probably wouldn't see it as such because they think both these guys are stubborn. But having Donald Fear and Gary Bettman at the helm is actually a plus. Like, this is not their first rodeo. Now it's their first coronavirus situation, but these guys know how this all works. And, they may dig in and, there may be some fighting about how they're going to do it. But both of them, want to get the product back on the ice. And both of them know the ins and outs of managing this situation better than most. I mean, Donald Fear's credentials are impeccable in terms of his experience in dealing with all sorts of unusual situations and so forth. So I would expect that despite the fact that there is built-in tension in resolving these kinds of issues, I would think they'd get it done relatively quickly. And I think it would be the best possible situation just because of their experience.
And it's not like they're dealing with this alone. This isn't like a labor negotiation where it's just your sport that's
right
down. This is everybody trying to figure this out, not just in North America. This is across the world. They're trying to figure it out in English soccer and New Zealand rugby, whatever. Any country where another sport that we wouldn't normally watch is the big sport. I'm sure cricket and field hockey and you name it. All the leagues that are dealing with this are all trying to figure out how are we going to make this work coming out of this.
Well, the one thing I would report, and now this was right before we went on the air. I had the television on, but I wasn't paying any attention to it. But the way my cable, they run like news items on a constant feed that you see while you're watching whatever. If you're watching a cooking show or PBA reruns or whatever, so you get these news items. And right before we went on, there was a news item that ran. It was one of the former Soviet bloc satellite countries, Tajikistan, maybe. Anyway, it was one of them that had opened up and had played their a soccer game, professional soccer game, at a stadium that holds 20,000, which draws well, and they got 500 because of the virus. So if that's any indication, I think we are destined to have lots of problems. I don't think it would be anywhere near that bad. We know just from, I keep joking about it, but it's really not a joke. The people that went on the beaches, even when they had the scare, we've had protests. Some people are just willing. And life is all about acceptable risk. There's no doubt about it. We drive cars, even though it's not always safe, and we drive too fast. And, some people smoke cigarettes. So, everybody has to make their own decision about what sort of risk they're willing to accept. And I think there will be plenty who'll just say, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'll beat it. I'll go sit and watch hockey.
Well, I mean, this is more of a risk along the lines of running across the freeway, though. You might make it, but odds are you could also get killed. And so I think this is a little. This is.
Well, I don't want to diminish it because that's exactly how I see it. Yeah. But I'm just making the point that I think some people don't view the risk as great as I do. And those people might go to games.
May not go to a lot of games, though.
So, well, yeah. So now it's interesting. Like we haven't even talked about this, but I talked to someone in the hockey world that brought this up to me. Are we going to, cut our capacity of all of our arenas down to 1/6 because are we going to space people out? Would there be 5 seats in between each person there? How is that going to work? And a lot of people are concerned about how they're going to line up to get concessions, because in some places the new arenas like Little Caesars Arena, you got a wide concourse there. I mean, you could land a 747 in that concourse, but in the older arenas, it's a little tight. And if you're gonna, if you in the beer line, if you're in, the Air Canada Center and you're trying to get a beer, and is there going to be room to put all the people in the line? So.
Well, I've been to Michigan Stadium and in the beer line, and you can miss a whole quarter of the game while you're standing there. So you might miss the whole game just to get a beer.
No, I know. Yeah. Well, that's all true. Anyway, as usual, we've run out of time. This clock always just ticks away. But we appreciate you listening, tuning in. We'll be back later in the week on Thursday with another guest, and normally that's our betting show, but then maybe Bob will regale us in more Russian table tennis stories.
I've got all the ins and outs on that sport, I tell you. Thanks for joining us, folks.